On my 66th birthday party, no one came. Hours later, my daughter-in-law demanded my house keys. The birthday candles had been burning for 3 hours now, their wax dripping onto the chocolate cake like tears I refused to shed. 66 of them, one for each year of my life, slowly melting away just like the hope I'd been clutching since noon. I checked my phone again. 4:47 p.m. Still nothing. The dining room table looked perfect, just like Martha used to set it when she was alive. Blue tablecloth, the good china we got for our wedding 42 years ago, cloth napkins folded into little triangles the way she taught me. 6 place settings, because that's how many people had promised to come. My son David and his wife Lisa. My daughter Sarah and her husband Mike. My 2 granddaughters, Emma and Sophie, ages 8 and 10. 6 people who meant everything to me. 6 people who had apparently forgotten I existed. The ham sat untouched in its glaze, growing cold and crusty around the edges. The mashed potatoes had formed a skin that looked like old wallpaper. Green bean casserole, dinner rolls, and that fancy cheese platter from Costco, all of it going to waste while I sat in my empty house like a fool. I'd started cooking at 8 this morning, humming old Frank Sinatra songs the way Martha and I used to do on special occasions. The house smelled like a real celebration, full of warmth and promise. I'd even put on my good shirt, the blue one Sarah bought me last Christmas, and splashed on some cologne. They're just running late, I'd told myself at 1 p.m., when lunch was supposed to start. Traffic must be bad, I'd reasoned at 2:30. Maybe they mixed up the time, I'd whispered to my reflection at 3:15. But now, pushing 5 p.m., even I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I stood up from the head of the table, my knees creaking like old hinges, and walked to the living room bookshelf. The photo albums sat there in their neat row, thick with memories of better times. I pulled out the one from 2018, my 60th birthday. The first page showed our whole family crammed around this same dining room table, everyone laughing at something David had said. Martha was still alive then, her silver hair catching the light as she leaned over to cut the cake. Sarah had her arm around my shoulder, and little Emma was missing her 2 front teeth, grinning anyway. Even Lisa looked happy, though now I wondered if that smile had been real. I flipped through more pages. Birthday after birthday, Christmas mornings, 4th of July barbecues in the backyard. The house always full of noise and life, kids running around, adults arguing good-naturedly about politics or sports. Martha at the center of it all, making sure everyone had enough food, enough attention, enough love. But Martha had been gone for 2 years now, and something had changed. The visits became shorter. The phone calls less frequent. Holidays turned into quick, awkward affairs where everyone seemed eager to leave. "Dad, you understand, right?" Sarah had said last Easter. "The kids have soccer practice, and Mike's got that work thing." "Of course," I told her, same as I always did. Family's busy these days. But understanding and accepting were different things entirely. I turned to my 62nd birthday, the first one without Martha. The table looked smaller somehow, even though the same number of people were there. David kept checking his phone. Lisa spent most of dinner talking about their new neighbor's property values. Sarah seemed distracted, tired. That's when the doubts started creeping in. Little things, mostly. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Worried glances between David and Sarah when they thought I wasn't looking. Lisa asking strange questions about my finances, my health, whether I ever got confused, living alone. "Just looking out for you, Dad," David would say whenever I brought it up. But it felt less like concern and more like evaluation. I closed the album and looked around my living room. Everything was exactly where it belonged. The furniture Martha and I had picked out together, the curtains she'd sewn by hand, the little ceramic figurines she'd collected over the years. Not a speck of dust anywhere, because I cleaned every day. Not a thing out of place, because order was all I had left. So why did everyone act like I was falling apart? The candles on the cake had burned down to nubs now, some of them finally guttering out. The room grew dimmer as afternoon faded to evening. I should clean up, put the food away, admit this day was over. But something held me back. A stubborn streak Martha always said I had too much of. She used to call it my bulldog gene. Once I bit down on something, I wouldn't let go. Maybe that's what kept me sitting there in my empty dining room, staring at the ruins of what was supposed to be a celebration. Maybe I was waiting for an apology that would never come. Or maybe I was finally starting to realize that my family's absence wasn't an accident. Maybe it was a message. The house felt different now, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, something to change. I could feel it in the silence that pressed against my eardrums, in the shadows that stretched longer across the hardwood floors Martha had insisted on refinishing 3 years ago. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. Normal evening sounds in my quiet neighborhood. But inside this house, inside my life, nothing felt normal anymore. I blew out the remaining candles and sat back in the darkness, wondering what came next. I was scraping cold mashed potatoes into the garbage disposal when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that cut through the kitchen silence like gunshots. My heart jumped. Maybe someone had come after all. Maybe there was an explanation for everything. I hurried to the front door, still wearing Martha's old apron with the faded sunflowers. Through the peephole, I saw Lisa standing on my porch under the yellow light, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the glow. She was alone. "Lisa!" I said, swinging the door open wider than necessary. Thank goodness. I was starting to worry something terrible had happened to everyone. She stepped inside without being invited, which wasn't like her. Usually Lisa waited for permission for everything, always playing the perfect daughter-in-law. Tonight, though, she moved past me with purpose, her heels clicking on Martha's hardwood floors. "Hi, Frank." She didn't meet my eyes. Sorry we're late. Where is everyone? David said he'd be here by noon. And the girls were so excited about Grandpa's birthday cake. They couldn't make it." The words came out flat, rehearsed. "David had that work emergency, and Sarah. Well, you know how busy she gets with the kids' activities." I closed the door slowly, something cold settling in my stomach. "Work emergency? On Sunday?" "David's never worked Sundays in his life." Lisa wandered into my living room, her eyes moving over everything like she was taking inventory. The antique side table Martha inherited from her mother. The grandfather clock that chimed every hour. The oil painting of the lighthouse we'd bought on our honeymoon in Maine. "Oh, you know how it is these days," she said, running her finger along the mantelpiece. "Everything's an emergency in his business." But David managed a small accounting firm in a town where the biggest emergency was usually someone's quarterly taxes. I'd been in business myself for 37 years before I retired. I knew what real work emergencies looked like. "What about Sarah? And the girls?" "Soccer tournament." Lisa picked up one of Martha's ceramic birds, turning it over in her hands. "Very important for Emma's development, you understand. These travel teams are so competitive now." I nodded, but my mind was racing. Emma played rec league soccer on Saturday mornings. Had for 2 years now. There were no Sunday tournaments, no travel teams for 8-year-olds. Lisa set the bird down in the wrong spot. Martha always kept the blue jay next to the cardinal, never alone on the other end of the shelf. It was a small thing, but it bothered me more than it should have. "Would you like some cake?" I asked, trying to keep my voice normal. "Coffee? I made way too much food." No, I can't stay long." She moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to peer outside. "David's picking me up soon." Another lie. I could see her silver BMW parked in my driveway through the same window. "Lisa, honey, are you feeling all right? You seem a little distracted." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Just tired, I guess. It's been a long day." "Long day doing what?" The question hung in the air between us. Lisa's perfect composure slipped just a fraction, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not the polite distance she usually kept, not the fake sweetness she put on at family gatherings. This was calculating. Cold. "Oh, you know." Errands. Shopping. The usual weekend stuff. She moved to my built-in bookshelf, running her finger along the spines. This is a beautiful house, Frank. Martha had such wonderful taste. She did. I watched Lisa's eyes catalog everything: the first edition books, the crystal vase, the silver picture frames. We spent 40 years making this place a home. 40 years, Lisa repeated. That's a long time to accumulate so many things. The way she said things made my skin crawl. Like Martha's treasures, our memories were just clutter to be cleared out. I suppose you're right. Though I can't imagine living anywhere else. This house has too many good memories. Lisa turned from the bookshelf to face me directly for the first time since she'd arrived. Memories are nice, Frank, but sometimes we have to be practical about these situations. Situations? You living here all alone? It's such a big house for one person. So much upkeep, so much responsibility. Her voice had taken on a tone I'd heard her use with Emma and Sophie when they were being stubborn about bedtime. Patient but firm, like she was explaining something to a child. I manage just fine. I'm sure you think you do. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. But today is a perfect example, isn't it? All this preparation for people who couldn't come. All this food going to waste. It just seems like a lot for someone your age to handle. The words hit me like a slap. Someone my age. Like I was already in my grave instead of just hitting 66. Like my birthday, the day I'd hoped to celebrate with family, was evidence of my incompetence instead of my loneliness. I see. I straightened my shoulders, feeling that bulldog gene Martha used to tease me about. And what exactly would you suggest I do about it? Lisa's smile widened, and I finally understood why she'd really come. This wasn't a late birthday visit at all. Lisa walked back to the center of my living room and clasped her hands in front of her like she was about to deliver a speech she'd practiced in the mirror. Frank, we need to talk about your future. My future? The words came out sharper than I intended. Lisa, it's my birthday. Whatever this is about can wait. No, actually, it can't. She sat down on Martha's favorite armchair without asking, the rose-colored one by the window that still smelled faintly of her perfume. That's exactly the problem. We've been trying to have this conversation for months, but you keep putting us off. What conversation? Lisa reached into her purse and pulled out a set of papers, folding and unfolding them like she was nervous. But her eyes weren't nervous. They were determined. It's time you handed over the house keys, Frank. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward, gripping the doorframe to steady myself. Excuse me? The keys to this house. And we'll need you to sign some paperwork transferring the deed. David and I have been talking to a lawyer, and we think it's best if we handle the property from now on. My mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Handle the property? Lisa, this is my home. Of course it is, she said in that same patient, talking to a child voice. And it always will be. But let's be realistic here. You're living all alone in a 4-bedroom house. The maintenance, the bills, the responsibility, it's too much for someone in your situation. My situation? I'm 66 years old, not 96. I'm in perfect health. Lisa gestured around the room like she was presenting evidence in court. Look what happened today, Frank. You spent all morning cooking for people who couldn't come. You set 6 places at a table that stayed empty. You're sitting here in the dark, still wearing an apron, talking to yourself. I wasn't talking to myself. You were when I knocked. I heard you through the door. She leaned forward, her voice taking on a tone of fake concern. Honey, this isolation isn't good for you. And frankly, it's not fair to David and me to worry constantly about whether you're okay over here. The room started spinning slightly. David's worried about me? Of course he is. We all are. Sarah too. Why do you think nobody came today? That cold feeling in my stomach turned to ice. What do you mean? Frank, we had a family meeting last week. Everyone agrees that these big gatherings are too stressful for you. The cooking, the cleaning, the disappointment when things don't go perfectly. We thought it would be kinder to scale back. Kinder, the word tasted like poison. You decided it would be kinder to let me sit here alone on my birthday? We were trying to make a point, Lisa said, and for the first time, her mask slipped completely. The fake sweetness disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. You can't take care of yourself anymore, Frank. Today proves it. Look at this place, you've got enough food for an army, and for what? Nobody came because nobody wanted to watch you struggle through another one of these charades. Charades? My voice was barely a whisper. These dinner parties where you pretend everything's fine. Where you set Martha's good china and cook her recipes like she's still here. It's sad, Frank. And it's time to face reality. I sank into the couch, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me up. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't process it. My own family had orchestrated my loneliness to prove a point. So you all planned this? The empty birthday was. What? A test I was supposed to fail? We were hoping you'd realize on your own that this living situation isn't working. Lisa stood up, smoothing her skirt. But since you didn't, we have to be more direct. David and I are prepared to move you into that nice assisted living facility on Maple Street. Sunset Manor. It's very clean, very safe. Assisted living? The words came out like a croak. I don't need assistance. I take care of everything myself. Frank, you forgot to pay your electric bill last month. David had to take care of it. I was traveling. I went to visit my sister in Phoenix, and I forgot to set up the autopay. You got confused at the grocery store 2 weeks ago. Mrs. Henderson from next door called Sarah because you were wandering around the parking lot looking for your car. The lot was being repaved. They moved all the cars to the back section. You called me Lisa 3 times in our last conversation. My name is Lisa. I stared at her. Your name is Lisa. No, Frank. Her voice was gentle now, deadly gentle. I'm Lisa. David's wife. You were talking to Sarah on the phone, and you kept calling her Lisa. She was too polite to correct you. The room tilted sideways. Had I done that? I tried to remember the conversation, but it felt fuzzy around the edges. Even if I made some mistakes, that doesn't mean. It means you need help. Professional help. And this house needs to be managed by people who can handle it properly. Lisa pulled out a pen and set the papers on Martha's coffee table. Sign here, and initial there. David's already talked to a real estate agent. We can have this place on the market by Christmas. Market? My voice cracked. You want to sell my house? It's for the best, Frank. For everyone. I stared at those papers, at my house key lying next to them like an offering to some cruel god. Everything I'd built with Martha, every memory we'd made, reduced to signatures on a legal document. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money or convenience. This was about erasing me completely. I stared at those papers on Martha's coffee table, but my mind was racing backward through the past few months, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. The phone call from my nephew Tommy 3 weeks ago. He'd started to invite me to his daughter's wedding, then suddenly backtracked. Actually, Uncle Frank, it's going to be real small. Just immediate family, you know? But Tommy and I had been close since he was a boy. I'd taught him to fish, helped pay for his college. Why wouldn't I be considered family? Unless someone had told him I shouldn't come. I need some water, I said, standing up on shaky legs. This is a lot to process. Of course, take your time. Lisa's voice was all false sympathy again. But Frank, the lawyer's office closes at 6 tomorrow, and we really need to get this paperwork filed. I walked to the kitchen, my mind spinning. The missed calls from relatives that Lisa mentioned. I'd tried calling my sister Janet in Phoenix last month. Got her voicemail. When she finally called back, she sounded strange. Distant. How are you feeling, Frank? She'd asked, like I'd been sick. David says you've been having some challenges. Challenges. What challenges? I'd been living the same routine for 2 years since Martha died. Get up at 7, read the paper with coffee, tend Martha's garden, watch the evening news. Simple, peaceful, normal. But apparently David had been telling people otherwise. I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept important papers and pulled out my small notebook, the one where Martha used to write grocery lists. Since she died, I'd started jotting down random thoughts, appointments, things I didn't want to forget. Flipping through the pages, I found what I was looking for. 3 weeks ago. Sarah called, seemed rushed. Asked weird questions about my episodes. What episodes? 2 weeks ago. Mike, Sarah's husband, stopped by unexpectedly. Walked through house like he was inspecting something. Asked about furnace, roof, maintenances, said Sarah was worried about me managing everything. And then, just 5 days ago, overheard Lisa on phone in driveway after David's visit. Thought she was talking to realtor? Something about staging and getting fair market value, and once we have the keys. My hands trembled as I read my own handwriting. I'd written these things down because they'd bothered me, but I hadn't connected them. Now, standing in my kitchen while Lisa waited for me to sign away my life, the pattern was crystal clear. This had been planned for months. I thought about David's visits becoming more frequent but shorter. How he'd walk through the house with that worried expression, checking things. Dad, when's the last time you had the furnace serviced? This carpet's looking pretty worn, isn't it? Maybe you should think about updating your will. I'd thought he was being helpful. Caring. But he'd been building a case. And Lisa had been the prosecutor. I remembered overhearing her on the phone with someone, Sarah, probably, 2 months ago, when they'd come for Sunday dinner. I'd gone to the bathroom, and when I came back, I heard Lisa in the kitchen whispering urgently. Getting worse. Yesterday he put salt in his coffee instead of sugar. And Frank, he called me Martha twice during dinner. I don't think he even realized. But I hadn't put salt in my coffee. I'd used the salt shaker on my eggs and forgot to put it back, reaching for the sugar bowl automatically. A simple mistake anyone could make. And I'd never called Lisa by Martha's name. I'd made a joke about Martha always adding too much sugar to everything, and Lisa had laughed along. But in Lisa's retelling, a normal breakfast became evidence of dementia. The wandering, in the grocery store parking lot that she mentioned earlier, I remembered that day now. The lot was being repaved, exactly like I'd said. I'd walked to the back section looking for my car and bumped into Mrs. Henderson, who was doing the same thing. We'd laughed about it together, complained about the poor signs directing people to the temporary parking area. But somehow, that became me. Confused and lost. Every normal moment of my life had been twisted, weaponized, turned into proof that I was failing. I gripped the kitchen counter, anger rising in my chest like a physical thing. They'd stolen my birthday. They'd poisoned my relationships with extended family. They'd made me doubt my own mind. But what made me furious was how patient Lisa sounded out there in my living room. How reasonable. Like she was doing me a favor by taking everything I owned. Frank? Lisa called from the living room. Everything okay in there? Just fine. I called back, but my voice had changed. The broken confusion from 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by something harder. Something Martha would have recognized. My bulldog gene was kicking in. I looked around my kitchen, Martha's kitchen, with fresh eyes. Everything was clean, organized, exactly where it belonged. The bills were paid, the appliances worked perfectly, the refrigerator was full of fresh food I'd shopped for and prepared myself. I wasn't failing. I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I was being hunted. But Lisa had made one crucial mistake in her months of careful planning. She'd underestimated exactly how much fight was left in this old man. And she was about to find out that I'd learned a few things in my 66 years. Things she'd never see coming. I walked back into the living room with 2 glasses of water, setting one down on the coffee table next to Lisa's papers with deliberate calm. She looked up at me expectantly, pen still in her hand. Feel better? She asked with that practiced smile. Much better, actually. I sat down across from her, taking a slow sip of water. You know, Lisa, you've been very thorough with all of this. Very. Organized. Something in my tone made her pause. The pen stopped moving in her fingers. Well, we just want what's best for you, Frank. I'm sure you do. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Before we get to your documents, though, I have something I'd like you to look at. I unfolded the paper and placed it on the table next to her legal documents. It was a business card. Morrison, Keller, and Associates, Lisa read aloud. Her brow furrowed. What's this? My attorney's office. Harold Morrison, specifically. Good man. Known him for 20 years. I took another sip of water, watching her face carefully. We had lunch on Tuesday. Lisa's confident smile flickered like a candle in the wind. Your attorney? Harold specializes in elder law, estate planning, that sort of thing. Very sharp for a man pushing 70 himself. I leaned back in Martha's chair, my chair now. Funny thing about Harold. He's seen a lot of families go through situations exactly like this one. I don't understand what you're getting at. Sure you do. My voice was still calm, conversational even. Harold took one look at those concerning behaviors David documented. You know, the list you had him make? The salt and coffee incident, the grocery store confusion, the forgotten bill payment? Harold's seen those exact same symptoms presented to him dozens of times. Lisa set down the pen. Frank, I think you're getting confused again. Am I? I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder, no bigger than a pack of gum. Because this little device has some interesting recordings from the past few weeks. Amazing what people say when they think a senile old man can't understand what's happening around him. The color drained from Lisa's face. You see, after that conversation I overheard between you and Sarah about staging the house, I got curious. Started paying more attention. Started documenting things myself. I pressed a button on the recorder. Lisa's voice filled the room, tinny but clear. Once we get him declared incompetent, the trust he set up with Martha becomes void. David gets power of attorney, and we can liquidate everything. The house alone is worth at least 400,000. I clicked it off. Lisa's mouth hung open. That was from last Thursday, when you thought I was napping in the backyard. You were on the phone with someone, your sister, I think, explaining the whole plan. I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. Amazing how sound carries through screen doors. Frank, you don't understand the context of that conversation. Oh, I understand perfectly. I stood up and walked to my bookshelf, pulling out a thick manila folder from between two photo albums. Which is why I've spent the past month having Harold help me rearrange a few things. I opened the folder on the coffee table, spreading out official-looking documents. Lisa leaned forward despite herself, her eyes scanning the papers frantically. As of last Monday, this house is no longer part of my estate. It's in an irrevocable trust with very specific terms. I pointed to one document. The beneficiary is the Riverside County Historical Society. They're going to turn it into a community center and memorial garden for Martha. You can't do that, Lisa whispered, but her voice cracked. Actually, I can. I did. And here's the really interesting part. I flipped to another page. Even if something were to happen to me, if I were to become genuinely incompetent or pass away, David has no claim on this property. None whatsoever. Lisa shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking completely. That's insane. He's your son. He's also the person who's been systematically lying about my mental health for months, trying to convince everyone I'm losing my mind so he can steal my house. I gathered up her unsigned papers and handed them back to her. These documents you brought? They're worthless. Even if I signed them, they couldn't override the trust. But the assisted living facility, we've already put down a deposit. Then you'd better get your money back. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Because I'm not going anywhere. Lisa's perfect facade had completely shattered. She stood in my living room looking like a trapped animal, her carefully planned scheme falling apart around her. You don't know what you're doing, she said, her voice shaking with rage. David will fight this. We'll contest the trust, claim you were manipulated. With what evidence? I held up the recorder again. Harold has copies of everything. The documentation of your manipulation, the recordings, the timeline of your campaign to isolate me from family. Plus, I've been keeping detailed notes of every conversation, every visit, every lie you've told about my behavior. I walked back to the coffee table and picked up the final document from my folder. And then there's this. My new will. Updated just yesterday. I showed her the first page. David's inheritance? $0. Sarah's inheritance? Also 0. Everything I own that's not in the trust goes to charity. Lisa stared at the document like it was a snake about to strike. Funny thing about respect, Lisa, I said quietly. It has to go both ways. Lisa stood frozen in my doorway for a long moment, clutching her useless papers like a life preserver that had already failed her. The October wind whistled past her into my warm house, carrying the scent of dying leaves and winter's promise. This isn't over, Frank, she said finally, but the fight had gone out of her voice. She sounded hollow, defeated. David won't let this stand. David can do whatever he likes, I replied, my hand still on the door handle. But he'll do it without my money and without my house. And without me questioning my own mind every time he walks through that door. She stepped onto the porch, then turned back one last time. You're making a terrible mistake. Who's going to take care of you when you really do need help? Who's going to visit you? You'll die alone in this house, you stubborn old fool. The words were meant to hurt, to plant seeds of doubt and fear. 6 months ago, they might have worked. 6 months ago, I might have handed over those keys just to avoid the possibility of ending up forgotten and isolated. But tonight, after watching my own family orchestrate my loneliness to steal my life, alone didn't scare me anymore. Maybe I will, I said quietly. But at least I'll die with my dignity intact. Lisa's BMW roared to life with more force than necessary, tires squealing slightly as she backed out of my driveway. I watched her taillights disappear around the corner, then closed the door and turned the deadbolt with a satisfying click. The house felt different now. Not empty, peaceful. The silence wasn't pressing against me anymore. It was wrapping around me like Martha's old quilt on a cold morning. Comfortable. Safe. I walked back to the dining room, where my birthday dinner still sat mostly untouched. The candles had burned down to nothing, leaving small puddles of wax on the chocolate cake. For a moment, I considered cleaning it all up, putting the food away, erasing the evidence of this strange night. Instead, I cut myself a piece of cake. It was delicious. Rich and moist, exactly the way Martha used to make it. I ate slowly, savoring each bite while I thought about everything that had happened. The elaborate betrayal, the months of manipulation, the careful campaign to make me doubt my own capabilities. But also the unexpected strength I'd found when I needed it most. The clarity that came with finally seeing the truth. The satisfaction of turning their own game against them. I'd spent 2 years since Martha's death trying to hold on to the family we built together. Accommodating their shortened visits, accepting their growing distance, making excuses for their coldness. Believing that some family was better than no family, even when that family was slowly poisoning my peace. Tonight had burned that illusion to ash, but something better had risen from those ashes. Freedom. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd call Harold Morrison and thank him for his help. Then I'd drive over to the community center on Elm Street, the one Martha had always volunteered at during the holidays. They were probably planning their Thanksgiving dinner for seniors who had nowhere else to go. Maybe they could use an extra pair of hands. After that, I might stop by the library. Martha and I used to love browsing the new releases together, but I hadn't been in months. I could restart that book club we talked about joining before she got sick. Meet some new people who didn't know about my concerning behaviors, or my need for professional help. I thought about my old friend Joe Martinez, who lived across town near the lake. We'd worked together for 15 years before we both retired, but we'd drifted apart after Martha's funeral. Maybe because David and Lisa had discouraged me from maintaining friendships, claiming they were too much stress for someone in my condition. Joe had called twice in recent months, inviting me fishing. Both times I'd declined, worried about what the family would think if I seemed too independent, too capable of managing my own social life. No more worrying about what they think. I finished my cake and looked around the dining room with fresh eyes. The table that had felt so pathetic this afternoon now seemed full of possibility. Maybe next week I'd invite Joe and his wife Carmen for dinner. Maybe I'd host that book club here, let Martha's beautiful dishes serve people who actually appreciated them. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, each note echoing through rooms that no longer felt too big or too empty. They felt like mine again. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at Martha's garden, where her roses were preparing for winter sleep. In spring they'd bloom again, the same plants she'd tended, but growing in new patterns, reaching toward the light in their own way. Like me, I supposed. The house phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the caller ID, David's number. For a moment, I considered answering, letting him rant about what I'd done to his carefully laid plans. Instead, I unplugged the phone from the wall and went to turn off the porch light. Standing at my front door, looking out at the quiet street where I'd lived for 40 years, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: contentment. Not happiness exactly, but a deep, bone-deep satisfaction with the choices I'd made. The house stays with me, I thought, echoing Martha's voice in my memory. And so does my dignity.